Okay. Good morning. We are starting chapter 36. And chapter 36, really, these chapters, 36, 37, as you'll see, they are from the foundations of Hasidus, specifically Chabad Hasidus, and they sort of explain why the Rebbe sent emissaries all over the world. They explain a lot of what you see and hear when coming to a Chabad house or studying Hasidus. Um, this will be understood in the following two chapters. Good morning. So the story goes about a few tzaddikim, few of the Alter Rebbe's colleagues. They were students. Do you have the volume 2?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Go ahead. I have
Okay.
a whole set of them.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you have the right. Okay.
I was catching up.
So there was a conversation around the table. What would you do if you were God and you created the world? What would you do differently? So every tzaddik gave their, no, if you were God and you created the world, what would you do differently?
You really want a list?
I don't know.
Pick one thing. Doesn't have to be the biggest thing. The thing that comes to mind. What would you do differently?
That's all that we've grown up with, what we see around us and what, everything. So I don't know. Can't really think out of the box here.
So back then, one said he would abolish poverty. Another said he wouldn't create the illness. He wouldn't create hatred, etc., etc. It came to the Alter Rebbe's turn. The Alter Rebbe said, if he was God, he would have created it exactly the way God created it, because he would know exactly why God created everything He created. Last week we spoke a little bit about what the purpose of the person is in this world, right? The person, like the metaphor of the candle. Person's purpose in this world is to do mitzvahs, to bring God's light into His body. Today we're going from the micro to the macro. Why was the world created to begin with? What's the purpose of the whole creation, the whole universe?
The guy would have no place number.
Oh, so you've been here already, once or twice. However, if you go back in Jewish literature for the Alter Rebbe, so there are a number of answers to this question. Let's imagine for a second. By the way, you said it already on the recording, so no one's going to think you don't know the answer. But let's imagine, no, you don't know the answer. What would be a possible answer of why you would think God created the world? Before you encountered this concept, what do you
Show off his artistic talent.
Okay, that's a show off his artistic talents. So in Jewish literature, in the Medrash and in the Zohar, there are many explanations given. The two that we will mention today are, one of them is that God wanted to do good. He wanted to be kind. You may have never thought about it, but it's not possible to be kind if you're the only person, the only thing that exists. Kindness can only be experienced when you're kind to another. Before God created the universe, there was nothing else but God. God couldn't technically be kind. So in order for God to experience kindness, He had to create other. That's one answer that's given. Another answer that's given is so that He should be known. God wanted to be known. It's a little different than when you said that to display His artistic talent, because God could have created a world displaying artistic talent without anyone else there to appreciate it, right? God wanted to be known. We like to be seen, right? We like to be appreciated for our value, God wanted to be known. Okay, let's take these two answers. These are classical Jewish answers that are given for why God created the world. Now let's ask the question, are these answers fulfilled by God creating our physical world, or could God have created the spiritual world, stop there, and would these answers have been satisfied? Why not?
Well,
I would argue on the contrary, that it's more satisfied there than here. Let's hear your argument.
if it requires others for God to experience kindness, if all you do is create an ephemeral world of spirit, there's nobody there either. There's just spirits.
But those spirits, those
Floating around,
fine,
you know, I mean,
but why aren't they
but
able to receive God's kindness?
Well, they were there, the spirits were there before,
No,
no?
before our world was created, not before worlds were created.
Were the two worlds created simultaneously? The
Which two?
physical world and the spiritual world?
Yeah, it was created in a Seder Hishtalshalut, in an order of regression of the
Okay, we studied.
right. But when we speak about the creation of the world, we're talking about the creation of everything outside of God, so to speak, which includes both spiritual and physical. Although in time, if you could say that, because there was no time, in time we came afterwards. We're sort of lower on the ladder, but they're created worlds just like we're a created world. If you think about it, kindness is experienced more in spiritual worlds. Also, spiritual worlds are more aware of God than we are. Think about it. Think how many people actually deny that God exists. And even the people that believe in God, do we see God wherever we turn? Are we more aware or not aware of God in our regular day? In the spiritual worlds, they're always aware of God. It's like in the sea. The fish that's in the sea is constantly consumed in its life source. And and there's only kindness up there. Here, there's a lot of opposite of kindness too.
Right. Would you consider like the Srafim Alfanim and that also
Correct.
is spiritual?
Yeah.
So, when we read the Kedusha, they're always, Kedusha, Kadosh, Kadosh,
Yep.
Kadosh, they're constantly praising him.
Exactly.
Even though.
So if God's looking-
Ashkadol.
So if God's looking for an audience, he's got a better audience up there than he does down here.
Right.
So most traditional answers that are given by traditional Jewish sources, those answers would be satisfied if God wouldn't have created our physical world. He would have just created a spiritual world, a world of souls, where everything is perfect. So why did God create this physical world? Because this is the world we live in. That's the world we care about, so to speak. So the Alter Rebbe quotes the Medrash that says, our world was created because God had a desire. Now, what would you categorize a desire? Like, give me an example of a desire.
Wanting something that you crave, that
Craving.
mhm.
Is a craving something that you can explain why you crave it?
You have a feeling like, you crave chocolate, okay? I don't think you can explain it, but if somebody walks by with a plate and you have that aroma and that enhances your senses.
God has a craving for the world. There's nothing. Okay, look, the words of the Medrash are that let's read this first paragraph here on page 484. The first in here it's going to be a line and a half of the chapter 36. In a well-known statement, our rabbis declare that the purpose for which this world was created is that the Holy One, blessed be He, desired to have an abode in the lower realms. Let's take apart this statement. Desire, abode, and lower realms. So desire, by definition, has no justification. Now, in a human being, it sort of does. If I ask you, why do you want the chocolate? You say, what do you mean? The smell just captivated me.
Right.
Okay. But by God, this desire happened before he saw the chocolate, before there was chocolate, right? In other words, there was no world.
Right.
So there wasn't anything that evoked, there was no external factor that evoked this desire. It was a pure desire. Now, God may be able to explain it, but the way he explained it to us, the only thing he let us in on was that it was a desire, it was a craving. What was the craving? To have an abode. What's an abode? A house, yeah.
place to live.
But it says in the Talmud that someone who doesn't have a house isn't a person, isn't a human. Why? You could live in your parents' house. You could live in a shack. You could build yourself a hut in the forest, or a shelter, some sort of shelter that's not a house. That's not why is a person not human and doesn't feel not human? Doesn't person feels like he's lacking his humanity if he doesn't have a house? You could do everything in a hotel room. You could rent a house from someone else and
The hotel room could be an abode.
no, said the word in Hebrew for about dira means a dwelling place. It means something that you dwell in, and it's not something that belongs to someone else or something temporary. This is your abode,
Like a sukkah. Sukkah would
not like a sukkah.
Right, sukkah would not be. An abode. However, my sister and her family, they built a sukkah in their backyard and they kept it up all year round. They asked the rabbi first, and he
You have
said,
to change the scarf every year.
yeah, change the scarf.
That's fine. That's the sukkah.
You have to put a mezuzah on.
Yeah, but that's the sukkah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So but during the year it has a cover, or it's open.
They do have some sort of place to cover, I think.
So during the year it's a regular room. You need a mezuzah.
Right.
So the Chassidus explains what's an abode. A person, anything you do at home, you could do somewhere else. There's nothing you do at home you can't do somewhere else. And yet you do it differently when you're at home. It's just your home. You feel yourself when you're cooking the same meal you could cook at the same. You could go to a hotel room, fancier hotel room that has a fancier oven range than you have, and actually you'll be very excited the first few days cooking there because it's better amenities and there's more stuff and a bigger variety. But at the end of the day, where do you feel more comfortable cooking? Your own home. Why? It's the same cooking. On the contrary, it's better cooking there.
Well, you know where everything is.
It's not just that. Even if you got used to it in someone else's kitchen, you'd still prefer your own kitchen. Not necessarily to cook a gourmet meal. If you had to cook a gourmet meal, you'd probably want to go to the catering kitchen because they have much better stuff there and you know where everything is. But where would you feel more at home? In your own kitchen because it's your home.
It's comfort. Comfort, I think, is the key there, because, like Roger said, you know where all the utensils are, you know where all the spices are, you're grabbing, as opposed to if you're at this gourmet catering place, you have to start asking, where's your pot?
But even if you know where everything is, I'm saying there's still a feeling of you allow yourself to be, you're more in your element. You allow yourself to be more revealed, more exposed. You're more vulnerable. You feel more of yourself being expressed when you're in your own kitchen versus or when you're in your own shower, or your own bedroom, or your own living room, or your own garage toolbox in the garage. Whatever it is you're doing in your home, you could do the same exact thing and even better somewhere else. But there's a feeling of expression, of openness, of revealedness that you can experience at home that you don't experience somewhere else. So God had a craving. In other words, we won't necessarily understand why, although we will soon understand a glimpse of why. God had a craving to have a dwelling place, not just to be here, but to dwell where? In the lowest realms. What's the lowest realms? In a world like ours.
Oh, when we talked earlier about the different levels,
Huh?
He's not good.
Hishtalshalut?
He's not absolute.
Yeah.
Like the lowest level.
Yeah.
Of all of it.
We don't, like I mentioned, we don't have an ability to understand God's why. We can understand our why. We can't understand God's why. But God chose to explain a little bit to us. And this is what he explained. This is what we the little bit we do understand. Where would you see a better teacher? Or where would you see if a teacher is truly good or truly amazing, an amazing teacher? When he's teaching a class of exceptionally gifted kids, or when he's teaching challenging kids? Challenging kids. When would you know that a doctor is truly a gifted doctor? When he's treating healthy patients or when he's treating sick patients? Right. How do you know if an athlete is a true athlete when he runs a straight marathon or when he runs a marathon when there's ups and when there's hills and challenges in the way? Same thing we could say about where God finds his true, what God craves for. In the upper world, in the higher world, so to speak, in the spiritual worlds, everything that happens there, the fact that they're aware of God, the fact that they're good, the fact that they're in line is to be expected. Where is there a challenge to God? Where is there a challenge to recognizing God, to accepting God? This world. Up there, the angels, they have no challenge. That's their DNA. That's their MO. Like you said before, a whole day they're jumping up and down saying Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. So the fact that they're doing that is not amazing. Now, the teacher that's teaching a gifted class is a good teacher. To teach a class of gifted kids, you must be a talented teacher. But where do you see the talent expressed more? Or where might you even potentially see greater talent if this same teacher is able to teach a class of challenging kids? In other words, God could have created the upper worlds and he would have been an amazing God. But where would you see that amazingness? Where would that amazing quality come to light more? And where may that amazingness actually grow? If God's recognized in a challenging place, not in a place where he's accepted, not in a place where he's a given, but in the place where he's challenged, where he's not the given, where he's not accepted. So God had a craving to have a dwelling place in the most challenging, potentially challenging place. Where is that? Here. You know, there are people that want homes, they want to buy homes in the most convenient places. They want to buy it in the suburbs, near the cities, right? In a quiet place, easy access, good schools. You want everything easy. Then there are people that like building homes or buying places in the most challenging places in the world, on the side of a mountain. Why would anyone build a house on the side of a mountain? Well, because if they can make it there, you have the most beautiful scenery in the world. You've accomplished the greatest feat. God wouldn't have been satisfied. His craving wouldn't have been satisfied with, why don't you just go buy cocoa bean, cacao bean, whatever, cacao? Why do you need some company to create this mixture of the chocolate? Go get the pure thing. Wouldn't that satisfy your craving more?
It's a lot of work to make a chocolate.
Yeah, right.
In other words, the challenge, when you get the challenge and you get it right, that's the greater the metaphor that the Maggid of Mezrich used to bring was that a parrot. Why do kings like parrots as entertainment? They can have their advisors come and they'd speak a lot more intelligently and a lot more clearly than a parrot. Why do you get so much entertainment from listening to a parrot speak? They can barely say a few words and just copy what you're saying. They can't, even though they could understand things, but they can't create ideas and things. So why is the parrot so entertaining?
Because he's feeding back what he already knows.
No, but why is it so entertaining?
What the king likes.
Why? No, the advisors, if the king had certain jokes he liked, the advisors would say it on repeat and they'd say it more clearly. And with tone and with the parrots just parroting away.
Yeah.
So if you ask someone what's so exciting about a parrot, what would they say? The parrot speaks. Say, that's exciting. This person speaks much better. Why isn't that exciting? Because it's not expected. You don't expect a bird to speak. You expect a person to speak. When do you get excited? When you see a person that doesn't speak. When you see a person that doesn't speak at all or can't speak, then you're wondering what's going on. That's exciting. I don't mean exciting in a good way. It's exciting in a, right? You're worried. When the kid grows up and he's 2 years old and he's not saying any words, when the kid's speaking, of course it's exciting, but sort of you're expecting it. When do the parents get more frustrated and do more and get more excited more excited when the kid's not saying anything? Because you expect them to speak. But when a bird starts speaking, that's crazy. When we here do a mitzvah, that's crazy. When an angel does a mitzvah, when an angel says kadosh, when an angel praises God, that's what they're supposed to do. When we praise God, that's amazing. And that's what God craves, so to speak. So let's just read this paragraph again, because this is the foundation of everything, because it explains why we're here, what our purpose is. It is well-known statement. Our rabbis declare that the purpose for which this world was created is that the Holy One, blessed be He, desired to have an abode in the lower realms. However, we need to understand. But surely before God, in other words, in his sight, the distinction of higher and lower is not valid. One world is no higher than another, for He pervades all worlds equally. What then do our sages mean by saying that God desired an abode in the lower realms? Okay, before we get there, what exactly does it mean, lower realms? What does lower and higher mean? So usually lower and higher, we think in terms of either physical, something's literally taller or shorter. And then there's lower and higher spiritual. You'll say that that's a very shallow way of thinking, or that's a very shallow, but this is a very deep. Deep, we mean it's very high, right? It's much taller. Shallow is much shorter. Yeah. So we either think in terms of physical height or the distance between physical and spiritual. But so is God higher? Is God more spiritual than physical? If we say God's up there, He's in the higher worlds, then we're limiting God. Right? So is God physical? He's also not physical. So what is God? And how do you get close to God? If God's spiritual, we know how to get close to God. How do you get close to God? You become more spiritual. Let go of physical things. But if God's not spiritual, or if He's spiritual and physical, or if He's not spiritual, not physical, how do you get close to Him? So the truth is, God is infinite. In other words, He's not spiritual, not physical. He's not either of them. Even spiritual is a creation. Not only is God not up there or not higher or lower, God is higher and lower equally. So if in the eyes of God everything's equal, what does it mean when we say God wanted it? God craved an abode in the lower realms. For God, there is no higher and lower. God's equal everywhere. So what does it mean higher and lower? For us, we know. And that's the thing. That's the key. There's two ways of looking at the world. There's our way and there's God's way. When you wear God's glasses, everything's the same. In other words, there's only God. Everything else is just God's imagination playing out in real time. There's no difference between the ant in God's imagination and the hero of the story in God's imagination. It's all God's imagination. Now, God doesn't have an imagination separate from whatever God imagines happens, right? God wanted it to be a world, there was a world. So we are all living in God's imagination, so to speak. Now, we're real because it says it in the Torah, but really, theoretically, we're all really, so in God's imagination, there's no difference between the hero of the story, the villain of the story, and the ant that's just taking up space in the image, in the imagination. But for us, there's a major difference. Where do we see God? Where don't we see God? That would be higher and lower. Where's God more revealed? Not because of God, because of our ability to see God. It says in the Hallel, we say it's in the Psalms, chapter 113. It says, Ram al kol goyim Hashem, God is higher than all of the nations. Al hashamayim kevodo, His glory is on the heavens. That seems to imply God is up there. Yeah. What does the verse continue? Then says, Hamashpili lirot b'shamayim uvaretz. God lowers Himself down to the heavens and the earth. So which way is it? Is God up there or is God everywhere? And the answer is, in the verse it says, God is higher than all the nations. In other words, David's telling us the difference in perspective, the Jewish perspective, whereas the non-Jewish perspective, specifically the idolatrous perspective. But even today, I think that you can say that the monotheistic non-Jewish religions also tend to fall into this category. The non-Jews tend to limit God to the heavens, limit God to the spirit, the spirituality. And therefore, how do you get close to God? Die. Don't get married. Don't eat. Don't have pleasure from this world. Remove yourself from the distractions of life. Judaism is just the opposite. Not just the opposite. We don't think God is only down here, but Judaism is the opposite in that God's not up there, God's everywhere. So if God placed me here, God's right here. God wants me to access him here. And if God put me here, then this is the place for me to access him. Not up, I can't access him up there. I can't do it up there.
Even when we're around us, some of the religions equate, God as nature, but we see his work, God's work in everything around us, and
That was the beginning of idolatry, right? The beginning of idolatry was that God created the world, but God wanted us to give honor to his tools. Nature is God's work. We should worship nature because that's what this is what God shows us. That was the beginning of idolatry. That's what Enosh said. Idolatry didn't just happen in one day. It was the beginning of it. We're saying no, that we're not being blindsided by nature. Yes, nature is God's work, but that shouldn't remove the focus from God himself. In other words, the difference between higher and lower is just because we're looking through our glasses. Through God's glasses, there is no higher and lower.
it's all our perspective.
All our perspective.
Right.
Now, in Kabbalah, God created, we said before, the Seder Shtalshel, right? God created 4 general worlds. We discussed this towards the beginning of Tanya. Atzilut, Bria, the world of emanation, the world of creation, the world of formation, and the world of action. They give an example to this from the birth of a child. That first there is the way the child is conceptually in the drop of semen that's in the father. Then that's Atzilut. That's the world of emanation. In other words, it's just an emanation from God. There's no creation yet. The second world is the world of creation, where the fetus is created. But there, there's the beginning of the child, but what you see now is just a piece of matter from the father and the mother coming together to create the child. You don't see a child yet. The world of formation, that's the third world. The world of formation, that's the 9 months where the child turns into a child. But it's still totally one with the mother. And then there's the world of action where the child comes out to be an independent being. So Atzilus, it says, is the world that's all good. It says Bria, the world of creation, is a world where it's majority good, a little bad. Bad here doesn't mean evil. It means God hidden. God's hidden a bit. The world of formation is half and half good, half bad. The world of action is most majority good, majority bad, because the child now is its own independent being. Sure, you could find God. Sure, you could look for God, but it's not apparent. It's majority bad. It's majority hidden. Our world, the physical world of action, is the lowest, the furthest you can possibly get from God. The most furthest, again, God is here just like he's up there. Furthest from our perspective. The most concealed you can get from God is our world. Someone could say, I don't believe in God. How much more concealed does it get? When someone's sitting in a bright room and says there's no light, there's no greater concealment than that. But do you say there's no light or that the person is blind?
Again, it's perspective.
In other words, if the room is light and you don't see anything, the problem isn't in the light. The problem is in your vision. If you see 50-50, it means you have 50-50 vision. If you see only 25%, then, right? So all of it's all in the perspective of the viewer, but in the perspective of the source of the light, light's everywhere. The same, equally. Okay, let's look here. Let's continue here. The explanation of the matter, however, is that God desired an abode in the realm considered lower within the ranks of the worlds, as follows. Before the world, in other words, any world was created, there was only he alone, one and unique, filling all the space in which he created the world. In other words, anything that could be conceived as a space or possibility for creation was filled with the Ein Sof light. There was no possible, it was just God. In his view, indeed, it is still the same now. In other words, creation wrought no change in his unity. He is one alone now, just as he is one prior to creation. So where is there a change? What happened in creation? The change applies only to the recipients of his vivifying force and his light. Whereas before creation, there was none to receive the divine light, force, and light. Creation brought into being these recipients. These recipients who receive this life force and light by way of numerous garments, which veil and conceal God's light. For without such garments, they could not bear its intensity and would cease to exist. So it is written, for no man can see me and live. In other words, if you see God, you cease to exist because you see reality, you realize your soul has no place in this body, and your soul leaves your body. You die from excitement. Your heart starts beating so fast, your body can't contain it, and your soul just leaves. And as our rabbis of blessed memory interpret the word v'choy and live in this verse, the verse we just read, as referring to angels. Thus, even angels called chayot, holy chayot, right, cannot see. In other words, they cannot see and live. In other words, even the angels that are jumping up and down the whole day praising God, they don't even see God really. They also see a concealed version of God. Godliness, except by way of garments which conceal him, thereby enabling them to receive his light. This concealment is the subject of the Ishtalshalut, the chain-like graded and downward succession of the worlds and their descent from level to level through the many garments that conceal the light and the life force emanating from him. The more concealment, the lower the descent, culminating in the creation of this physical gross world. Gross, right? That it's material. This world is the lowest in degree. In other words, in degree of concealment. There is none lower than it in terms of concealment of his light, and no world compares to it for doubled and redoubled darkness. Nowhere is God's light hidden as in this world. So much so that it is filled with klipot and sitra achra, which actually oppose God, saying, I am, and there is nothing besides me. In other words, they say, I am, and there's nothing besides me. So the difference is between the perspective, the way we're viewing the world. Last week we mentioned from or it was 2 weeks ago, or whatever, there was a while ago, from the Kotzker Rebbe, that God, remember he asked the students, where's God? He said, what do you mean everywhere? He's like, no, where you let him in. In other words, where you're not, your ego isn't overpowering or overtaken. Yeah. There's another story, a different Hasidic Rebbe, that when he was a kid, someone asked him, someone was playing with him, and he said, I'll give you a ruble if you tell me where God is found. So the Rebbe told him, this child told him, I'll give you 2 rubles if you tell me where he's not found. How do they two go together? Here he's saying he's found everywhere, and the Kotzker Rebbe says he's only there where you let him in. Of course, God's everywhere. The question is, where do you see him? You can only see him if you let him in. If you remove the veil, you remove the sunglasses, if you remove the cataract, the damaged lens, then you could see it. So if the whole purpose for creating this world is because God desired it, he had a craving for it. So is our world the purpose of everything? Or are the upper world, the higher worlds, the ultimate purpose, the ultimate goal? Someone mentioned before, you said before that the way to get to God, the best way to get to God is to die. Ask the question from a religious perspective. Is the purpose in my life the time I spend here, or when I die and my soul goes to heaven? What's closer to the end game, to the goal? Being here in the physical world or being in heaven?
I think being there. There was a poem that they sometimes read. Versus stated. It's called the dash. Everything in that hyphen, that dash, represents everything on earth that that person has done. But it's only represented by a line. You know, and how can we, you know, they say it's the person's life is 70, and then if you have a little bit of luck, it's 80, and you know, much more luck in 90, and so forth. All those years, you know, when you die, it's just represented by a dash. But all the things that you've done, all the mitzvot that you performed, and all the chesed and tzedakah and everything that you've done during that lifetime, you brought in Hashem in your life during that period.
It's true. You're right. Let me push back a little, not because you're wrong, but because I want to bring out the novelty that the Rebbe is going to say here. We had this discussion a little once before. What do you see as the objective or the goal? The work or the retirement?
The goal would be retire.
So the goal, and the Mishnah, by the way, in Ethics of Halal is one of the Mishnahs, there are two conflicting Mishnahs. One of the Mishnahs says that that 1 hour in the world to come is more precious than the whole physical world. Get yourself ready in the hallway so that you can enter the palace. Being a metaphor of this world. In other words, behave properly so that you can go into the palace and go to the world to come. I think if you look even in Jewish literature, let alone in any other religion, this life is either seen as a distraction from God, but even from a Jewish perspective, this life is the purpose for which God created. At the end of the day, this life is to prepare me for the world to come. Most Jews, I think, most Jews, not Hasidim, today may be a little different because Hasidus is strongly influenced, but most Jews prior to Hasidim lived this world with the objective that they would do as much as possible so that they can earn a bigger piece of the world to come. Like retirement. They won't have to work anymore. They'll just, in the verses of our prophets are full of this. Everything's full of this, where the world to come is the place where you get to enjoy the fruits of your labor, of what you worked for all your life. Al-Rebbe is saying that can't be. It can't be that that's the goal. And here's the reason why. When you make an investment, it doesn't matter how much money you come out with at the end of the investment. That's not what makes the investment worthwhile. What makes the investment worthwhile is if you came out with more than you went in. In other words, I tell you, someone's a multi-millionaire. He has $50 million and he makes a $5 million investment. And at the end of the investment, he comes out with $4 million. And you focus on he came out with the investment with $4 million. Does it look so terrible? Doesn't look so terrible, right? But would any sane person invest $5 million to come out with $4? Even though you came out with $4 million, you still wouldn't invest $5 million because you lost. Would you invest $100 to make $105? I think most people would.
Mm-hmm.
Most people, if you had an account, you could put money in and you get a guaranteed 5% return. You'd put your money in every day, right?
The rates they're going today, sure.
Sure, $5, right?
Yeah.
You're only coming out with 105. The other guy came out with 4 million.
But he put more in.
Oh, he lost, you gained. It doesn't matter how much you gain, it matters that you gained. The spiritual worlds, we get carried away when we think of heaven. Even those of us who think about heaven, we think about heaven, we get carried away because we're looking at it through our perspective. And heaven is much more than we are capable of here. But for God, is heaven a profit or a loss? In other words, in heaven, is God's presence felt more than it was before he created heaven? Is God more revealed in heaven than he was before, or more concealed than he was before? He's more concealed. Every world is a concealment. World, olam, in Hebrew, olam, is the same word as halem, concealment. A world, by definition, is a concealment. Even the angels, we said before, they don't see God clearly, it's a concealment. So even though the angels are much, much, much more spiritual than us by a million times, but for God, the angels are a loss. They're a step down because they're a concealment. We, on the other hand, in this world, we're a net gain. Why? Because when I do a mitzvah and God is revealed in the darkness, that's not something God had before. Sure, it's more revealed in heaven, but the revelation in heaven is a downgrade from the way it was before. When we reveal God in the darkness, that's an upgrade because that type of revelation never existed. There was never a revelation that came from the darkness. Where do you see, as a teacher, you're both teachers, where do you find more satisfaction when you see a kid that really, really struggled and then worked very hard and at the end of the year shines, even though he's still getting lower grades than everyone else? Or the kid that came in with an A and left with an A, or came in with an A and left with an A plus, maybe even. Okay, there's a net gain. But, or the kid that started off struggling and not being able to do anything and worked very hard and got somewhere. There's no question.
Right.
Why? Even though, by the way, even though for, I don't know if they score teachers this way, but imagine they score teachers based on the kid's grades, even though that kid means you get a lower grade. Because he's not getting, he affects your grade in the negative, where the kid that got the A plus makes your grade go up. You should be getting more satisfaction from the kid who's hiring your grade. But you don't care about that.
The thing is that when we talked about teaching, and I was thinking about this before, and it's exactly the same thing. If we, you tell the kid, if you study hard, whatever you put into it, you get out of it. And hopefully you get a little bit more, like you say, to make that next step up. It's okay, and you build on, just like in, like anything, with math or science, whatever, you build on what you learn, and then, oh, hey, like we're doing in Tanya. Hey, remember we learned that last chapter, okay? Now we go to the next chapter, and we're adding a little bit thing, adding it so we can see it clearly.
The Talmud says this clearly. The Talmud says, if a person says, I worked hard and I found, believe him. But if he says, I worked hard, but I didn't find, don't believe him. In other words, he didn't work hard. Or if a person says, I didn't work hard, but I found, don't believe him. What does it mean I found? It should have said you worked hard and you earned or you gained. And the commentaries all say, because when you work hard, you find. Finding is when you get something that you didn't work for. In other words, but if you work hard, you're guaranteed to gain much more than the investment that you put in. So therefore, the purpose of all of creation, even the purpose of the angels in the highest worlds, is all for us. This was the goal. So is the goal that we should die and go to heaven? No. The goal is the resurrection when we come back into this world. Or the goal is, more than that, the goal is try to be here as long as possible and do as much as possible, because this is where it's all at. This is where the action is. You have this even with people, whether it's in the army or doctors or firefighters or anything. They have rotations, right? The 3 days in, 2 days out, or whatever, however it works. Okay, the time that they're in. If they see this as being their mission in life, they're going to try to take advantage of every minute they're here. They want to be every minute. Sure, they want to go and enjoy vacation. Why do they want to go enjoy vacation? So they can get right back into it. Mm-hmm. And while they're here, they're not thinking about the next time, or they're thinking about now, here and now. We don't think about the reward we're going to get in the next world or when Mashiach comes. We want to do the mitzvah now because this is the purpose. This is why God created us. Okay, let's see inside. The bottom of page 487. We're at 8 Adar 2. purpose of the Hishtalshalut of the worlds and of their descent from level to level is not for the sake of the higher worlds. In other words, they're not the end game. Since for them, this constitutes a descent from the light of his countenance. In other words, it's a net loss. Rather, the purpose of Ishtalshalut is this lowest world. Thus, the purpose of the Ishtalshalut is this world. For such was his will, that he find it pleasurable when the Sitra Achra is subjugated to holiness, and the darkness of Klippa is transformed into holy light. So that in the place of the darkness and Sitra Achra prevailing throughout this world, the Ein Sof light of God will shine forth with greater strength and intensity, and with the superior quality of light that emerges from the darkness. In other words, when darkness is transformed into light, the resulting light is superior to ordinary light. It will thus shine with greater intensity. Then its radiance in the higher worlds. The quality of light that emerges from darkness is greater than its radiance in the higher worlds. There, in the higher worlds, it shines through garments and through concealment of the countenance, a concealment of the pnimiyut, in other words, the internal aspect of the light, which conceal the screen and screen the Ein Sof light, so that the worlds do not dissolve out of existence. Because we said before, if anyone sees God, even the angels, they will cease to exist, right? For this purpose, the Holy One, blessed be He, gave Israel the Torah, which is called might and strength, for it gives us strength to receive such revelation without being overwhelmed by it. Let's see, and as our rabbis say, that God gives tzaddikim the strength to receive their reward in the world to come. Why is this strength? Why do we need strength? So that their existence should not dissolve within the divine light that will reveal itself in the hereafter without any garment. As it is written, and your teacher will no longer hide from you, meaning not as some interpret the verse, he will no longer withhold your reins, but following Rashi, he will no longer conceal himself from you with the edge of a robe or garment, and your eyes will behold your teacher. And it is also written, for they shall see eye to eye, meaning that the human eye will see the divine eye. So we'll see as the divine eye sees, right? He'll have the same vision. He won't see the concealment. We will clearly see the revelation of God's light. And it is further written, the sun shall no longer be your light by day, for God will be your eternal light. When Moses went up to receive the Torah, so the Medrash says that a conversation unfolded. The angels said, what is a human being doing here? So God told them he came to get the Torah. So the angel said, why should he get the Torah? The Torah should be here. So God told Moses, why don't you answer? So Moses said, it says in the Torah that I am the Lord God who took you out of Egypt. Were you in Egypt? Don't steal. You have an evil inclination to steal. Don't covet. Do you have an evil inclination to covet? And the angels backed off. What happened? They didn't know that it says in the Torah, do not steal, do not covet. What exactly did Moshe tell them they didn't know before? But this was their argument. Their argument was, you're a creation. What are you doing up here? The Torah belongs here. We're closer to God. We're more spiritual. We're more able to be receptacles. We're more able to receive the Torah and handle the Torah.
Selfish.
And not only that, if you will take the Torah, you will cease to exist. Because you're going to have God's revelation. You can handle it. So Moshe says, but that's what the Torah is for. The Torah is to give us the strength that being in Egypt and having an evil inclination, we're able to overcome it. And by doing that, we have the strength of Torah to receive that light that you can never get. Because your light is a net loss. The light we will create or we will unveil by dealing and exposing the light in the darkness, through the darkness. That's the purpose of it all. Next week, we'll get into when will this happen? How do we know when this, because God has a craving. When does he actually get to eat the chocolate? When does he get to live in this house? How does that happen? What is that process and what does it look like? How do we know when we're there? That we'll learn next week. We'll stop here. I know it's a few